Hey everybody, we'd like to welcome you to our weekly webinar. Just keep in mind that we do a weekly podcast that's audio only as well, and Mike and I are doing a lot more stuff. Please take a good look at what we're doing online. I want to thank Mike for really helping to organize our archives. Now the deal is, as we go through these municipal statistical areas, we look at principles of marketing and demographics. We have archives that we've built up over the last couple of years. And so I really want you to go back and look at it. So let's say you're thinking, I want to know what's going on in Texas, but they haven't done a recent episode on it. You can go back and look at our other stuff. We are not charging for this. So this is a free thing.
We're not?
Well, at least you're not getting any. I'm
not getting any. Right.
The idea is, of course, we want to offer value with your time. But we also want you to think about us whenever you need site analysis, telephone consultations, and stuff like that. So, we're putting it out there to try to help you. So please, do what you can to help us too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We both got kids in college, if you know what I'm saying.
Seriously. Got to put food on the table somehow.
All right. Now let's talk about what our topic is this week. Now, we've been going through the municipal statistical areas, or MSAs, the big ones, and we're probably going to pick up in the next week or two. I'm going to do this again. We'll probably look at Arizona. I want to do another overview of Texas and maybe look at some other mid-Atlantic states. Okay, we're going to do that. But today I got into a kind of a discussion with a guy about how do you know if the area is perfect? Again, that's the deal, that we have a perfect place to put a practice podcast. But he was saying, I have never seen a perfect area. And I said, it's a little bit of hyperbole. What we're really trying to say is it's good or good enough to make an investment in further examination. So don't get the idea that there is some perfect Shangri-La out there. And today I want to talk about 5 locations that I think are generally good, but they always have a little bit of a fly in the ointment. There's always a little something you have to overcome. And I figured maybe we'll talk about what you can kind of ignore and what you can't, and also about those locations that have some potential. So I'm going to go ahead and, like an old guy, share my screen.
Oh boy. Bear with us, folks.
Your lack of faith in me is beginning to get a little old, man. That's all I'm saying.
If we had some improvement over the last year, then I never mind. Go ahead, Scott.
We've got music. We got music.
Right. So,
all right, we'll talk about that later. So I'm calling this Yeah, But sites. Yeah, but, like that. So yeah, but sites are really where you have to make a practical compromise. Okay, let's also be honest about doctors. You guys are really anal retentive as a group. And many people will say, unless it's perfect, I don't want to be a part of it. Well, that's a mistake, because often you're missing great places that have potential and not considering what you need to do in order to bump it up and to make it even better. So I want you to start thinking about not perfection, but rather the possible and the reasonable. We're going to return next week to talk about the large MSAs. And remember, that stands for municipal statistical areas. And those are the big places that you consider going. So let's get into this and compare yeah buts. I want to compare it to your spouse. And you're maybe going, what does this have to do with my husband or wife? Or my girlfriend or boyfriend? All right, here's what we want to talk about. Now, if a person is a good companion, a good significant other, they took care of you when you were sick. When you had a terrible cold, they made soup for you. Now, I bring this up because some people kind of get the idea that your spouse has to be perfect all the time. My wife just turned 40. I'm going to trade her in for 2 20s. That's not a good idea, okay? Ultimately, a good relationship, you kind of have to see what you really have there. Now, ultimately, your significant other at some time picked up your dirty clothes when you were too tired to do it yourself, and you just dropped it on the floor, and they came back and picked your stinky socks up, and they kind of took care of some things. They mowed the lawn and shoveled the snow when you couldn't do it. And that's kind of nice. And frankly, they helped in the process of giving you children. Now you may be thinking, this is not spectacular. This is not a reason why I want to go to a location. Well, here's the fact of life. Your office and your location is not going to be perfect either. There will be brand new places that open up, stores that have opened, new populations that have moved in, new housing. But there's also going to be some things that may be bumps in the road. There may be, as happened this week with one of our clients, a murder in the neighborhood. Now, that's never particularly good news. Nevertheless, it's true news, and it's a thing that happens. Doesn't mean you want to move out. It doesn't mean that the place is tainted. It just means stuff happens, and you kind of have to take that for granted. So let's go back into this metaphor of your spouse. Your spouse at one time was 22 years old, and they were smoking hot. Maybe not so much anymore. Maybe after a couple of kids, they're not looking so good. Maybe they've lost a little hair. It happens, okay? And occasionally, your significant other may actually snore or breathe heavily, and that may wake you up. That happens too. That's how relationships are. Sometimes they'll eat potato chips in bed. Not that it's a good thing, but it happens. And sometimes you'll have a disagreement. You still love each other very much. And unfortunately, there isn't much left now of mystery in your relationship. Now, some people look at a site like a 22-year-old underwear model. They kind of think, oh, he or she is going to be fantastic for the rest of my life. But that doesn't happen either. And the same thing is true of your site. So what is important in a site? Comparing yeah, but locations to a spouse, I want to remind you of something that I tell people about my own sweetheart, my wife, Susan. I tell people that she is perfect in every important way. I mean, I really say that. In every way that is important, she's perfect. That she's not perfect in every way, however. And she wouldn't think that either. And I'm assuming, she may say that about me too. So when we're talking about yeah, but sites, remember the place that you want to put a practice is a place that you can make a significant living and that will help you to grow and add value to the practice. And locations are that way. Now, ultimately, we have to consider also, is the location you're in improving or is it getting worse? Are you improving? Or are you getting a little worse too? Now, sometimes people will lose a little bit on their skills, but sometimes they're picking up in their knowledge. So there's a little bit of a give and take with you. But the same thing is true about the locations that you're practicing in. You have to assume that at all times, the location in which you're practicing is going to go through changes and you're going to have to adjust. If you don't have the idea that somehow we need to do something to refresh your image, to draw more people in, to let people know that you're there, if you don't do that, you are going to fall behind. Now, I just want to share with you something about yeah, but locations. We get calls from doctors, and this happens all the time, and I want to remind you about this same thing. They have a specific need that may not be a need that everybody in your profession, your colleagues, will have. But they still need a good researcher to help them figure out what is a reasonable place to practice for their circumstance. And I'm going to give you a few right off. Number one is the ski school. I had a guy who had a teenage daughter, and she was probably 14 or 15, and a remarkably talented skier. She was really rising in the competition levels, and they were already grooming her to become an Olympic skier. Now, her father, who is a dentist, said, I would like to go and move a practice someplace where she can attend one of the 5 or 6 ski programs in the United States. Now, that's a reasonable thing. Unfortunately, some of the ski schools are not particularly well positioned in order to take advantage of this. So he asked me, here's what I need Here's what I want. Here's what the practice should be. And you know what we did? We found a place for him. We found a location that was, in fact, not too far away from one of the great national ski programs in the United States. They needed dentists in that area, and it worked out very, very well. Now, that's not a thing that everybody needs, but it's a thing that he needed. And sometimes, yeah, but locations are that way. Another thing happened. Sometimes people get divorced. They get divorced and they have kids, and they get divorced, have kids, and they have a custody and visitation schedule. Now, it means that you can't just move anywhere. You got to be close where an airport might be, that might be within a reasonable drive to get your kids or drop them off. And that is a reality. So if you happen to have that situation, I want you to tell us. I want you to get our help to find a reasonable place where you can have reasonable imperatives met, like custody and visitation. Another one is licensure. You know, you're not licensed to practice everywhere, are you? Are you? No. And there are some places that it's going to be nearly impossible to get a license. I know that may surprise you, but some states don't want you. That's because there are so many people they want in, or because the schools are very difficult to get into, or frankly are trying to kind of limit competition to their own people. But if we know that that's an imperative, we can look in those places that you do have license to practice. Another one is a commute time that is reasonable. And I'm going to bring this up because it's a little odd. Most doctors are married to another professional. This is a rising thing. They may not be another doctor, but they may have a career of their own. And therefore, finding a place for you to practice and for them to work, it can be a trick, but it can be done. And so what I'm telling you, it doesn't have to be the best place in the world, but it does have to be an acceptable place to meet your life. So that's why licensure and commute time has its own little line. I'm also going to be honest with you about life in general, and that is many of you are going to get older, and so will your parents. Sometimes parents get sick, and sometimes one of your parents may pass away, and the other one will need help. I know it may sound odd, and you don't necessarily want to make your whole life around your elderly parent, but sometimes that happens too. Now, I'm just bringing this up because there are things that you can do that you may need the help of a demographer in order to find. And that is what we can do. Now, here's the thing. If you have every choice in the whole nation of where to go, and it didn't matter any of these issues, fine, we can find you the perfect place to put a practice for you. But a lot of times what you're trying to find is not a perfect location, but an acceptable location based upon your circumstances. So that's what this little part is about. Now, I want to go in to talk about some yeah, but locations. Now, you probably know that there are some places in the United States that have perfect weather, remarkable. And if you're a surfer, well, you're going to have to go someplace near the ocean where you can get the great waves. But a lot of times you're going to have to find something in a compromise to get it. Now, I'm going to go through these 4 locations, these states, maybe 5. Well, let's go through them. And ultimately, what I want to do is to illustrate the point that sometimes you have to compromise. Please be especially aware that when you're sitting around talking to friends about where you want to practice, they may have an imperfect knowledge of where to go. Sometimes they'll say, oh, I heard this is just great. Well, those are danger signals, because sometimes what they think is important may be less than a yeah, but location. It could be just the pits, but they heard it was great. So let's talk about North Carolina, for example. Now, a lot of demographers love North Carolina because it is growing, and it's growing really crazy fast. And they talk about that high-tech arch that's in the northern side, part of the state, Greenville, Durham, part of Raleigh, Greensboro, Winston-Salem. You know, that arc right there has got incredible amounts of growth. And what's more important than the growth, it's got a lot of people with money and high education who moved here. So a lot of doctors are thinking, this is where I want to be. A lot of people are moving down from the north, from New England into North Carolina, because it is so inexpensive. You can get a home that will not cost very much money at all. And you may assume, oh, this is heaven. North Carolina is where I want to go. Well, there's a little bit of a yeah, but. And that yeah, but is you've got so many new practices that have started up in most of these places that I've just mentioned in North Carolina that you're going to get in there and say, I'm not sure that I can have the Taj Mahal that I want. I'm not so sure that I can get into an office that I'm not going to need a partner, because you may. And that's where you start having to make compromises. Now, yes, at Dr. Demographics, we can help you figure out, is this a reasonable compromise? Or where, if this is really important for you, should I go? That coastal plain area that's identified is kind of awful weather, okay? If there's a hurricane that's coming into the Atlantic coast, it's going to hit somewhere along the coastal plain. It's not very nice. And yes, the weather can be really nasty, hot, and humid. Sometimes just awful. Now, sometimes if you go up to the mountains, the Blue Ridges, it can be a little bit isolated. You are the way the heck up there in the Smoky Mountains, and you may never see another person who has all their teeth at one time. I'm just saying. But you see, that's part of what you're looking for. Now, if you look in the southern part of the state, the same thing is going to be true. Just to let you also know, there are lots of people who say, well, why should I go with your demographics and not somebody else's, which happens to be, they say they're faster, and they may even be cheaper. They may be. But most of the time, what you're looking at when you do that is not an analysis. They're giving you raw numbers. And they don't really take into account any yeah, but categories. They don't say, you could go here, but that might be better. Now, most of these people have never been to Gastonia. They have no idea how different that is from Charlotte. It's a big difference and kind of important, and the surrounding communities there are important to know. That's where an analysis by experience can make the difference between a really good and kind of a marginal location. So I'm just saying, do I like North Carolina? Yes, I do. Are there places you may have to compromise a little bit to find just what you want? That's why I put this up. Let's talk Pennsylvania. Now, a lot of people moved to Pennsylvania in great numbers, especially if you look at Philadelphia. Now, did you know, by the way, that there are just really 3 or 4 parts of Philadelphia that are spectacularly good, and 5 or 6 parts that are they suck hose water. They're terrible. But you see, if somebody says, I want to go to Pennsylvania, I've got a spouse who just got a job in Greater Philly. Could I go there? And the answer is, yeah, you probably could. Is Scranton a great place? I'd kind of go, not really. But if you want to compromise, there are parts of Scranton and even Wilkesboro, Barry, that are really good. My preference right now in Pennsylvania is really on the western side of the state. I'm liking Pittsburgh more and more, and even McKeesport. Those are some good places to consider. But even then, there's no slam dunk in Pennsylvania that would make you say, oh, this is perfect. So therefore, we're looking for it. Yeah, but yeah. And so it's what is that yeah, but that is going to account for what you want and what's good and what's bad. Now, I will also mention some states around it, like Ohio. I really like parts of Ohio, and I don't like other parts of Ohio. So Ohio is one of those that I was almost putting up here for a yeah, but state. You have a lot of compromises you have to make. So that being said, I think you get the point. Let's talk about another state that is a pretty interesting yeah, but. Now, I know Nevada extremely well, and I've traveled there a lot, very often, and looked at practices. Usually, unless you just really love horses, I tend to stay away from the eastern side of the state. Uh, yeah, Elko is lovely. Winnemucca has a nice acquired taste to it, but you can feel like you are on an island in the middle of nowhere. Most of the people who go to Nevada are thinking, yeah, I want to go where there's lots of growth, so therefore I'm going to look up in Carson City or Sparks up in that north, or I want to go down to Las Vegas. Are there places in either of these that are going to be good? And I'll take Las Vegas as an example. I really like Las Vegas. Growth has been fantastic, but you got to choose your neighborhood, because there's a part of greater Clarks County, which is what you call that area down there, that is going to be really good, and part of it that may not be so hot. A lot of people have moved from California into Clarks County, by the way, because it's just over the border from California, and they can still get back to visit Southern California when they want. But that is not why it's been growing. It's because its economy has diversified so much. It isn't just a place for shows and conventions. It does have a lot to offer as far as some high tech and warehousing and transportation hubs. So some people kind of go, yeah, but yeah, look, I want to direct you where you can go. And this is an example of not just saying here or there. It's rather to say, what are you going to find in these areas that you really want? Incidentally, I like Carson City fine, but Reno is really the place that I really love. And if you look on the north side of Reno, you're looking at some very nice, significant growth. Still, it's a little bit of a yeah, but, because there are so many new residents who've moved there that don't have a lot of money, that sometimes you may be looking at a new neighborhood that it's going to be a challenge for you. Okay. Let's talk about Iowa for a second. Iowa is a perfect example of a, yeah, but yeah, really. Look, Iowa has several yeah, but locations, and Des Moines happens to be one of the biggest ones. Do I like Des Moines? Well, you got to understand, you're going to be giving up some really great weather. And the thing about Iowa, people can be a little nasty, if you want to know the truth. It's a little homegrown, it's a little bit just us kind of thing. And unless you sort of fit into the neighborhood, that can be a little bit of a challenge. You've got to get the idea in your mind that to move to a state like Iowa with significant growth and good business development, you can't consider it like many of the other states in the United States. Still, I challenge you to go to a city like Davenport, assuming the weather's good, or Dubuque, and not kind of like it. It's got some good things. And then we look at Cedar Falls and Waterloo. They're not huge towns, but they're showing good development. It's a good middle class area. And in fact, I'm going to say this about Iowa. It doesn't have the extremes of wealth, but then again, it doesn't have the extremes in poverty either. It's got some things that you have to kind of say, yeah, but is this good? And that's why I kind of look at Iowa and say that's the same kind of a thing. Fort Dodge, I was surprised. I liked it very much, but it could have been just the day of the week I was there. And I just want to warn you, there's no place in Iowa in which the weather is spectacular. It doesn't exist. So you're going to have to kind of put up with that as well. All right, now let's talk Florida for just a minute. I'm going to move this thing here. Now, you may be surprised because everybody talks about how wonderful Florida is. Look, Florida is like several states combined. Northern Florida, particularly around Tampa, not Tampa, but Tallahassee, I like it. It's terrific. I think it's probably the worst place on earth if you are experiencing the summer. But you know what we're finding? There are lots of places that are coming up as pretty darn good. May not be perfect, but pretty darn good. I think Orlando sort of falls into that, basically Orange County. I rather have found Miami-Dade County and Broward counties are making a comeback. Now, they were not that great. Frankly, they got a little bit poor, crime went up. They had some problems they had to deal with, and I am proud to tell you, they've done very well with that. If you look at Hillsborough County, where Tampa is, and Pinellas and Clearwater County, boy, those are some places that I'm kind of going, yeah, I think those are some good places. But every place is going to have some challenges. Now, one of the things that you're going to note is if there's a major storm, if there's a flood, if there's an attack of killer alligators, it'll happen in Florida. You'll also note that they've got some people moving to Florida who are, I'm going to put this in the scientific demographic way, scummy. A lot of people who you don't want to live near, and they are kind of shaking out and finding themselves in certain places and not in others. Now, there are lots of places that I like in Florida. By the way, St. Johns County, up in the north, St. Augustine area, if you don't know about it, you really ought to look. I think Jacksonville is a city that is going to have a tremendous future in Duval County. So I'm just saying, yeah, there's opportunities out there, but just remember, these places are going to have some things. Maybe it's the weather, maybe it's crime, maybe it's something else. You're going to have to kind of figure out what's important to you and what's not. So let me just kind of wrap up on this note. You guys, one of the things that I recommend you do before you start doing demographic reports is talk to somebody. It's less expensive to actually talk on the phone and get a teleconference and to make a go of that. That may actually wind up being one of the wisest precautionary things you can do to overcome the yeah buts. A telephone consultation. By the way, just to let you know, they're $225, and we usually do them online, a video conference. And with that in mind, we can do the research about what's important to you and what's not in almost any state. Now, by doing that, you don't have to say, well, where within the state should I go? This is just a precautionary thing, a thing that grown-ups do in order to help them. If you have any questions or problems at all, I want you to write to me at info@drdemographics.com. I know that Mike is always standing by to help with your marketing needs. And I, as always, want to thank you so much for watching this little webinar, and please tell your friends and neighbors about it. We look forward to helping you in the future. You take care.